People who grew up rich, when did you realize you were living in a bubble and not like everyone else? When I started talking in school about the pros and cons of Disney World versus Disneyland, and people were like, you've been on vacation. LUCKYY. I did not grow up rich, but my husband did. His sister once said I didn't know everyone didn't live in big houses until I went off to college. Apparently she led a very sheltered life. Wasn't rich but realized I was far better off than I was led to believe when I tried filling out FAFSA forms to go to college. My mother freaked when I told her I needed income information. Turns out, she'd been lying about our financial state for years and didn't want to see any of that money spent on college for any of her 5 kids. I found out that we were far poorer than I'd believed when I finally convinced my dad I needed our tax info to fill out the FAFSA. He was straight up refusing to give it to me for a while. I'm not super rich, but things really hit home when I was with a friend and his mother started to panic because she couldn't afford milk for her toddler son, my friend's little brother. I was just walking around with $40 in my pocket for no real reason, so I gave her $20. She was embarrassed to be taking money from a 13-year-old, but swallowed her pride for the sake of her children. I knew my friend wasn't as well off, but it never fully hit me what that meant before then. To me, being poor just meant someone couldn't afford nice things. What it meant to struggle with basic necessities like milk never really struck me before then. This isn't a great response because I didn't grow up rich, but rather very poor. I feel like I should share though. I met my first best friend in grade 6. When she brought me to her home I was flabbergasted. They had a vacuum that plugged into their walls. They could even vacuum downstairs with it. She had a trampoline and Xbox. I begged each time to play with both. She had a small alcove with a mini fridge that was full with ice pop and different sodas. That was cool. I remember thinking I should take more than one because I wouldn't get another chance. When they invited me over for dinner, her mom always made me take extra because I was nervous to ask for seconds. I couldn't believe the amount of food in the house, and we all would have a huge glass of milk with dinner. Milk was always a treat and being able to drink as much as I wanted was so overwhelming. I just remember being astounded by everything, and 3 years later they adopted me. It sounds like you were able to get out of a bad family situation into a better one in the most positive way possible. I was about 12, I think. When friends would come over they would go on and on about how big the house was and how I had more games and computers and crap than them. They especially seemed freaked out about the maid. And I just started to realize that I didn't have the same circumstances as most. They wouldn't all say it if it weren't true, I assume. I did have other friends with money, especially when I started attending private school, but I didn't realize they were well off either. Reading AskReddit threads where people talk about the things they ate or went without as a kid. It was always foreign to me that ramen was an actual meal for some people and not just a quick unhealthy snack. Having grown up poor, it surprises me how many people regularly ate ramen. That was a special treat at our house. My parents bought rice by the 50-pound bag. Rice for dinner every night and free school breakfast and lunch. Not rich, but in high school, there was this one kid who wore the same shoes from sophomore to senior year. I kept telling him to buy a new pair, but he would claim that they were broken and he didn't want to waste money on uncomfortable ones. I decided to do that thing where the class would surprise him with a new pair of Vans for his birthday. But when I asked our classmates to chip in, they all said they didn't have any money to spare. That didn't make sense because most of them had after-school jobs. That's when I found out I was the only kid in class who wasn't working to help support their own family. I ended up getting him the shoes on my own. Rich is relative. I grew up in a trailer park, so definitely not well off. Made a new friend one day and invited him over for dinner. Kid was blown away by the size of the hamburgers we were eating. And you could have another one if you wanted. Just typical 1/3 lb or so patties. We were poor, but they were rationing serving sizes poor. We had HVAC. They didn't even have window units. We didn't have holes in our floor ceilings. It rained inside and out at their place. We definitely need to be reminded of stuff like this more. I wouldn't say I'm rich, but I can go to a store and afford whatever food I want. So actually yeah, I am rich. Thanks for that. Edit. Thanks for the award thing. The first time I went to my best friend's house, His circumstances were the exact opposite. His parents tried their best, but his dad often didn't have much work during the winter, and his mom didn't work outside of the home. They had 6 kids, and usually had things like pancakes for dinner. I'm in an upper class part of DC, with every toy and electronic imaginable, and he had none. It was a good lesson for me to learn, but it was a shame that it was at the expense of a person I loved so very much. Conversely, I remember a summer where me and my mom lived in a car and I thought it was the coolest thing. It turns out we were just homeless. Meanwhile in university there was a guy who didn't understand why we didn't all have our own condos right by the school. He also never understood why we didn't have money to go to Mexico on reading break and would just tell us to ask for a bigger allowance from our trust. He learned to just stop talking after someone fed him a left hook when he made a comment about how stupid we are for taking out student loans and not just paying tuition up front. I overheard one of my older brother's friend tell another friend, "Because we're not rich like your spoiled freaking butt, you might have more money than me but we all look down on you." I actually felt bad for the rich kid before I got old enough to understand what a C he was. When I went to my friend's house when I was about 8, that was the first time it sunk in that 15,000 SQFT houses weren't normal. My uncle was in a famous rock band. We didn't have a ton growing up, but whenever I went to my uncle's it was always super fun with all the toys and snacks he'd get me. He wasn't crazy with his money. His favorite restaurant was the Waffle House, but his home was on the beach, nice cars, etc. So I recognized the wealth. It wasn't until I was like 8 years old that I realized not everyone was related to a celebrity. He died a couple years ago and my heart still hurts. I'm gonna take a shot in the dark and say REO Speedwagon. I was talking to a friend about going to the town's public beach and they were saying how horribly crowded it gets in summer, and I suddenly realized, I was well into my 20s, that I had never had to go to a public beach because I always had at least 2 private family beaches to go to, one with cabanas, outdoor showers and space for cooking. I always had taken it for granted. When I became poor, I'm the daughter of a single mum, who's always had a good job and is good with money in general. We took trips all around Europe every year. We're European, so nothing too fancy. She bought a new car on a regular basis. We would go to theme parks, cinemas, theaters, zoo and all sorts of other exciting things very often. We weren't super rich and I wasn't spoiled, but I had a good life and I took all of these things for granted. I eventually chose a wrong career and lived off of welfare benefits for a couple of years. I now work a job that pays less than minimum wage. I currently have €80 to my name until tomorrow. Having a car and taking vacations seems super unrealistic to me now. I was 8 or 9 and we were on a family trip for one of my sister's tournaments. We were driving through a somewhat run-down neighborhood of multi-family homes and trash in the streets. I remember distinctly my sister and her friend saying how gross everything was and laughing about it. My dad, the sweetest, most soft-spoken Midwestern country boy ever, piped up and almost yelled, "Hey, this is how most people live. You need to understand what you have." Everyone in the car just sat there in silence and he drove on. We grew up upper middle class. I am a pediatric dentist now and will always accept Medicaid largely because of this moment when I was a kid. More upper middle class. Since I started using Reddit, especially reading AskReddit posts, I've been realizing more and more every day how fortunate I am. Bruh, there was an AskReddit post last night asking what do you wish you had never seen. I really felt blessed reading some of those stories. I grew up middle class. When I was in 5th grade I spent the night with a girlfriend. In the morning I remember her asking what was for breakfast, and I remember seeing my friend's face. I then realized the kitchen was literally empty. The dad came in and gave us a small package of those small white donuts from the gas station, 4 in the package. I felt so embarrassed that I asked. We had a great day hanging out, but I learned what poverty was that day. I remember reverse pickpocketing my best friend's dad. I remember I got a $50 for my day one year and I put it in his wallet while I was over at their house. Never said anything about it. OFC, knowing my friend's dad, he probably bought a homeless guy lunch with it, but I never did find out anything about it. In terms of raw cash flow, my parents were never rich. They were just teachers. However, they were international teachers, so I got to see and do things many people have on their bucket list by the time I was 18. I definitely had a very privileged upbringing, if not a rich one. I was kinda aware of it, but it never really hit home till my first year living back in the States, where people just didn't know about so much of the world. Apparently you've never been on People at Walmart. I have a family member that grew up with a private jet. The first time she flew commercial, she turned to her family and asked, "Who are all these people on our plane?" On flying, I'm no way rich, but I was reading that the majority of the world's population, over 90%, didn't take one flight last year. I'm not sure if that's true. I'll look for the post, but that hit me pretty hard how fortunate I am to fly to see family sometimes. 2 times come to mind. I didn't grow up stupid rich, but definitely well off. My grandpa is a successful doctor and was able to build his empire and live a very good life. As I've gotten older and things have changed, my lifestyle has certainly shifted towards myself being more self-reliant. I was dating this girl and we drove past my grandpa's giant house he used to own. Still in the family, but he's moved, and she asks me to slow down. She was in love with this house and told me she'd always dreamed of living there as a kid, and her parents telling her she'd never be able to live in a house like that. Another time was when my best friend tripped into the whole "I freaking love you guys" rant one time when he was drunk. He slowly worked his way through our friend group talking about why we were important to him, and when he got to me he mentioned how when we were younger he'd try to not be home around dinner time so that his mom wouldn't have to worry about feeding both him and his sister and that my family and I always took care of him and made him feel at home. This is something that never crossed my mind in the 20-something years we've been friends, from him practically living at my home for an entire summer or the weeks he'd stay over during the school years when we were in high school. I never gave it any second thought and just wanted my friend to be around whenever he could be. I grew up upper middle class, not private jet rich, but definitely was able to enjoy life's luxuries, nice vacations, newer products, etc. Honestly, I think it was the small things that were a lot bigger for other people. I never really cared much about the price of a meal. I simply ordered based on whatever sounded the best. Add on some sides? Sure, why not? Same thing with driving. I always volunteered to be the driver on long trips because I never really thought much about swiping my card for gas. Just fill up and go. No need to check my account. I definitely realized in college that a lot of people didn't have that privilege. I remember as a kid having nothing in the fridge and nada in the kitchen to eat. Doorbell rang and opened it. No one was there but a bag of groceries someone left for us. That was the moment I realized we were poor. Not rich story, but it hit me regardless. The first time I met other kids who didn't have domestic household staff, I remember not understanding why they didn't have people to maintain their household. Until the age of 12 we were very rough. My mom was working for basic wage. She also spent a hefty portion of what she made in online games, and my father had been unemployed for 5 years and making on and off money selling a bunch of useless stuff. All this in a collapsing economy. But then my dad won a case with his former boss and got a significant amount of money. Money he invested in his own company in his field of expertise. 3 years later he was able to expand his company in a variety of fields. I was fortunate enough to be really poor while growing up as to be able to appreciate in my mid to late teens what we now have and realize how fortunate we are. Define growing up rich. My dad didn't start making real money until I was at least 10 or 11. We were comfortably middle class before that. I guess it started when we moved to a new city and people in my school would openly tease me about being rich. I think the first thing I started noticing was that we took a big annual family vacation, usually on a plane, while many of my friends have never flown before. When I realized the poor neighborhoods were actually very nice, safe, middle class neighborhoods and not in fact poor areas. When my dad bought me a house to live in rent-free, no mortgage, and realizing that most people don't holiday in the Algarve twice a year, my house is now a hostel safe space for anyone I'm friends with close to who needs a place to stay. How I know I didn't grow up rich? I had to Google Algarve just now. I grew up in an extremely privileged family, multi-million-dollar house, country club, multiple cars, etc. There were a few times I can think of where I realized just how unique my upbringing was. First and foremost, before my father started his business, he grew up extremely poor as one of 6 children in a 1-bedroom house. From a very early age, he always taught my brother and I just how good we had it compared to what he had as a child. This helped broaden my perspective, but because we lived in a very affluent area, it was difficult to actually see until I moved away. I attended a small college in a rural area, and to be honest, I had a massive culture shock. Most of the people I met were struggling to survive on student loans, working multiple jobs, and had little to no financial help from their families as they tried to get through school. I had never been around so many people going through financial hardship, and it really made me appreciate how lucky I was to grow up in an affluent household. Aside from realizing how lucky I was, I also had a strong feeling of guilt, especially because in addition to being more than able to pay for school, I was on a full-ride scholarship for athletics. I couldn't stop thinking about how hard many of my friends were trying just to make ends meet, and how unfair it was. From that point on, I always try to be considerate of those who are less fortunate, and help them in any way I can. The people I met at college are still some of my best friends to this day, and without a doubt the nicest individuals I have ever met in my life. I'm grateful for the lessons they taught me, including that while money may be a facilitator of happiness, it does not automatically channel. You can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.